Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the show. This is your Civic Duty, a discussion-focused show where we tackle issues relevant to politics and social problems today. I'm your host, Shant, and with me today I have some wonderful guests. We have Elena, John, and Dina. Where we left things off before, we were talking about the use of language and words used by within a political context, and we were just starting to dive into how the media uses these terms and words to kind of portray certain perspectives. So going back, Elena, you mentioned something before our break, was how the media, the tone that they use kind of sets the urgency and, perspective that they're trying to give off on something. So you said, if there was aliens that are, we discover new life in the universe, and it could be like, oh, hey, we found water or something, or there's aliens that are gonna come and invade us and all this. So that's like an extreme kind of example.
They might come to Earth, okay.
But something that is more grounded, I feel like, is, in the news when we see something where it's like, oh, black suspect killed by police officer versus unarmed black man killed after officer felt threatened. It's these kind of words and choices used to paint a picture or perspective that, the media might be biased on, or they might not even have that bias. So we or another thing could be when they come out and say, socialist Venezuela is in crisis without energy for 2 weeks because of what's going on in there, versus, talking about Puerto Rico and how for a year they didn't have any energy and, people were dying as a result of the hurricane. So
yeah. And I also, one of the strongest examples that I wanted to say as well is how the media treats a white terrorist
mass shootings
versus a colored terrorist or a Middle Eastern terrorist or something like that, right? So we assign different words. In fact, to the credit of the media, lately they've been assigning that word more to white shooters, but it wasn't always the case. This is now something that people are fighting for and becoming more kind of aware of, that why are we applying this double standard when someone who's white shoots up a bunch of people versus someone who's colored or someone who is of Middle Eastern descent or something like that, right? And so definitely I think it's in the line with the examples of, okay, how exactly is the media setting the tone of not only urgency but of danger or not? How does the media perceive danger, and what kind of dangers are they trying to prepare us for?
And I think, Elena, the reason may not have been the reason you brought it up. The reason I think you brought it up is, is the attention and the importance that we give to headlines, right? So why does it matter how, these aliens coming or the water that was found on Mars? Why does it matter how it's phrased? It's because we put so much, emphasis on headlines. And you're right, John. The biggest example is the mass shootings. And so I lived in Vegas last year, and I was about I was walking distance from the MGM where I lived. And so, the shooting was a huge part of the Vegas community. Vegas is a very tight-knit community, as is Nevada. There's no one living in the state. So even if you're talking about your people in the state in Reno or in Vegas, it's a very small-knit community. And throughout a lot of the conversations that past year, I don't recall, even with Uber drivers or whoever I was interacting with outside of my daily life in the courthouse, a lot of the language that was used was not, oh, they're a terrorist. Oh, he was, there was no terrorist language that was used to describe him. And that is also partially a factor because Nevada is a purple state. There are gun owners everywhere. I had grandparents of people I interacted with who had guns. And in the courthouse, when you walk in, and you don't see this in Los Angeles, well, it's not as, visibly aware or visibly apparent. When you walk into the courthouse in Vegas, the federal courthouse, it says multiple times, no firearms. Why? Right. Because everyone in Vegas, in Nevada, has a firearm. And so that perspective of the shooting in Vegas really brought to my attention, we put a lot of emphasis on headlines, and that's why it matters so much. Because they'll have the 10-minute piece or the 60-minute episode discussing it, and they'll use different terms, but in that headline it's different.
And I also want to say, based on that, like, I would even take it farther and say the headlines and how they deal with those headlines. I agree with you. I agree with the points you made. And I would even say that the way that they deal with the headlines is also the way that we plumb the information. The way I'm thinking about it is in the sense of this white mass shooter in Vegas. We tried, and the FBI investigated and all these things to try and uncover the motivation behind it. And at the end of the day, I don't think they ever uncut. Like,
No,
it
they
seems
didn't.
like it's like
2
this
months
kind
ago.
of, it seems like it's this kind of like just no one ever expected it, blah, blah, right? But we always try to create a narrative around the white person that we oversimplify when it comes to the Middle Eastern person, or we say, oh, it's just like this Islamic thing, or it's like this other thing, or whatever. We always simplify the background of certain people and privilege the kind of like background that we delve into for other people.
He's
right?
like a troubled individual, like they
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
like he wasn't.
This
mentally
Christchurch guy
fit
was
or-
chubby, so he was bullied when he was younger, and like all this stuff. And it's like, had he been of a different color or different socioeconomic background or something like that, I'm pretty certain, at least as far as the media reports, unless you're a diligent consumer of the media, you would probably only get a very surface level reading of what exactly happened.
Yeah, you're not going to go into the psychosis of a person of color that might
Because
lash
that'll
out
reveal
like
a
this.
flaw in like maybe a systematic thing that no one wants to address, or
Yeah, I mean, or I think it's just easier for them because it's easier to paint. Oh, this guy was politically motivated to being the terrorists that we're all trying to fight versus a homegrown terrorist that is lashing out. Because when it's like homegrown, it's like, oh, maybe we
What's
did
wrong
something
with home?
Yeah, what do we need to
Yeah.
what do we need to do? Even though we don't actually do anything to like
Right.
fix the problem.
Thoughts and prayers.
We always just like talk about how there are problems and that the other side is wrong. No matter what perspective you're on, that's what it's become. We have a shooting, we come out and yell at each other, and then the next one happens. Like, it's literally what
Yeah, I think when it's not a minority, a lot of people see it as that could have been me, my dad, my brother, or and so I think the media pays better like due diligence on, like you said, psychoanalyzing them, and it's I mean it's sort of a bias, right? Because they would not do that for another person, whether it's intentional or not.
Sure, it's a bias.
It's a bias behind who is the one writing this story, who, I mean, has most likely also been a white middle-aged man too. So I don't know. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with
I
it.
wouldn't generalize that as who the writer would be, but I think, like, to bring it back to our first point, what's interesting is just the different types of headlines that we see for the same story.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
oh, yeah.
I do think that it is like, up until recently, that like they have been in media and been writers more often than not than
That's the dominant perspective.
It is the dominant
which was your
perspective,
earlier point about politics and how
Yeah.
it's changing, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the one of the big points I wanted to make, naturally, anyone who presents the news or information and all of that, naturally, there is some sort of, that person has an opinion, right? They have they could present facts and report them and then state their opinion on it. I think there's a enormous difference between that reporting and then stating your opinion versus inherently having a bias on the information that you're presenting. So one is you're presenting the facts and then giving your opinion on it. And I feel like a lot of times what they'll do is they'll present specific facts that follow the narrative of that's behind a politically motivated narrative. So then it's like they're almost redefining what the truth is, because they say that, hey, urban communities, black communities have the highest crime rates in the whole country. This is a people and a culture that just perpetuates crime, and they don't want to hold them up, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and put in good work to their community. But then that's taking out the information and saying, well, okay, what are the systemic issues? Why is it that people behave a certain way? Can you really attribute it to like a cultural laziness, or are there things set up in the system that prevent people from that social economic mobility that forces them to stay within that, so I think that's a big part of this conversation with language and what's used and how you present it, because you can claim you're presenting the information, which you're not wrong, you're presenting facts, but that it's kind
like
of
legal
weird
writing. I mean,
you
just wait until the opposing party either figures it out or puts it out. So, if they're too lazy to put out their facts, then we kind of win, because, and that's, so to bring that perspective into the real world is, if you have news reporters saying certain facts, it is up to the public to find any opposing facts. If they don't, because we're lazy, because we're humans, then that's our only set of facts is what we're presented.
And I also jive with what you were saying, Sean, about how like they pick and choose certain facts. It's like It's like you're a museum curator, right? And this is kind of like very present in the classroom as well. When I'm teaching basic essay writing, I tell my students, okay, you have your thesis statement, right? Which we all know and maybe hate, but it's the thing at the end of the introductory paragraph that gives you a sense of not only the claim you're making, but also how you're making that claim as like a roadmap, right?
Structure, yeah.
Yeah. So what I tell them is, before your reader even gets a glimpse of that thesis statement, your introduction should serve as a way to manipulate them to pre-agree with your claim. That's what I tell them all the time. And I tell them that this is the art of rhetoric and the art of manipulation, and sometimes it is malicious. But if you understand it, you can look out for it and be aware of it, right? In like politics and whatever. But the point is, you start with like a generic kind of thing as your first hook, and then you lead in and you're just curating certain things so that by the time I get to my thesis statement, which is cats are cool because X, Y, and Z, then they already will love cats by the time they have gotten to the thesis statement that is saying cats are cool. Because I'm not giving them facts about I might be saying, most deaths of babies result in like a dog ownership or something, like
which isn't
something
wrong.
like that.
I don't think cats kill babies.
No, right. It's not. Technically, they're not wrong, but
no, trust me, I hate cats.
They chose that fact. I don't like cats either, but they chose that fact, over like a more broad scope of like, let's say, the systemic thing involving like certain neighborhoods and how their, levels of financial security work. You're manipulating the audience. It's just pure manipulation, and it works in something as easy as freshman essay writing, and it works in a courtroom and making a case like as a lawyer, and it works at the highest office in the land with our president. It's in every aspect.
Yeah, it's definitely a scary point too, because on one hand, yes, sometimes it's just natural that you present whatever opinion or bias or whatever may be in there, but when it's intentionally done to cater to specific viewers, because whoever is watching wants to hear what you're saying, then it becomes a little dangerous if you're also trying to inform your viewers, because then you will. That's what misinformation is. You start to misinform them because you want them to keep watching you. This is the whole ratings and capitalism that doesn't work with media. No, because honestly, if the motivation for a media outlet or news outlet is profit, then the primary purpose of reporting the news and informing an electorate so they can make responsible choices in a democracy becomes undercut by, okay, what is going to be the story that sells the most? What is going to be the thing that gets most people to watch and talk about?
And the headlines, what's the biggest clickbait?
The click.
Exactly, the clickbait. Oh.
Sorry, not to beat a dead horse, and maybe the last point on this, but when you said motivation, I immediately thought of informing. Okay, who informs? Media, and then education. So when you look at teachers, and I haven't been around a teacher. That's not true. I haven't been around teachers in only 2 years. But you, and tell me if you're wrong, and it might be different at the collegiate level than it is in primary education. You're trying to present these kids everything because you're not making a profit off of them. I mean, you are. Yes, you are if you're, in private education. But technically speaking, it's not like you're going to get more money if these kids believe what you're saying.
No, yeah.
Your biased perspective. So you just give them all the information. So there's
As
two
best
different,
I can.
as
yeah.
best as you can, of course. But you're not sitting there the same way a media oh my gosh, what are they
Like a
called?
news anchor.
A
Like-
news anchor.
a
Thank
news
you.
anchor,
I'll say it like this. If you're a good professor, I think you don't do
Yes,
that. Some
true.
professors
Exactly.
really
That's
throw
true.
in their bent.
That's true.
Yeah.
And
But
you know,
but their
the
motivation,
media.
I think what I was saying about Shant's phrasing was their motivation is not profit.
no,
It's
not,
just ego
yeah.
because they're tenured, but
ego is a big part of
yeah,
it,
that's
no
true.
matter what level. Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
I
No,
thought that was
I-
No, I like that point.
immediately came out was the different motivations of informing.
Yeah.
And how do you keep the eyes, draw it out, be big, appeal to the masses?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, exactly. That's what it is. You want to, get people to see your view on it.
Sean, you brought up capitalism.
I
and,
did.
and I know this is like a
Always.
topic that touches you very deeply, politically and
Sometimes.
personally and stuff like that, right? And so it's like not only this, but it's everything we've been discussing in your view, because you are very curious about how we're thinking, but I'm actually curious in your terms.
Oh.
Is this all a byproduct of capitalism? Because I feel like a lot of our conversation is baked in assumptions that we have as biases being capitalists. Like even if, or living in a capitalist like nation, you know what I mean?
Definitely, yeah, because we are mostly doing all of, a lot of what we talked about with Orwell and the article written by Orwell, which, by the way, we'll put up in the link description, all that, so you guys can check it out and read it. Oh God, what happened to my train of thought?
Like is all of this a byproduct of
Yes,
capitalism?
capitalism. Yeah, because we're talking within the context of the United States media and United States politicians, and we uphold this economic system that runs everything, including our media, including how we disseminate information to the masses, because it's done largely through these private corporations that have the profit motive in mind, but they're responsible for informing the audience so that we can responsibly make choices in a democracy, because that's the purpose of news, is to make sure that people know what is real and the facts and all of that, so that they can make responsible decisions. So I think of course, yeah, capitalism definitely has to play a point in this, but that's not to say that I'm going to come out and say socialism needs, for us to have a perfect media and news thing, it needs to be socialist. It doesn't, because it's especially when you bring up this conversation and say that, like, oh, okay, we need more public oversight in news reporting. Well, then some people will bring up the slippery slope argument of like, okay, how much public oversight and control of the media is it going to be to the point where, we're going to have an authoritarian dictator, not saying what the facts are, not saying what this is or that is, and lying to the people in order to make it, give a perception that everything is doing good, doing well. But I think it's all about finding that balance of accountability, of, having this transparency and information being put out. And I think the biggest thing that capitalism tries to address is having quality, in the sense of, will we have quality journalism if it's all, set to the public sector and we don't have that private profit incentive? And I think a lot of times we don't need that profit incentive, because like you said with teachers, the best teachers are there who are not in it for the money. The best teachers are there because they want to educate these kids. They want to educate this next generation so that they can be, functioning adults in whatever society we have. So a good journalist, I don't think you don't become a journalist because you think you're going to make a ton of money off of it. You become a journalist because you want to, you have this drive to be like, oh, information needs to be presented in an unbiased way, or I like telling stories, or I like diving into, I like having these kinds of discussions. So there's something other than money being the primary motivator, and I think that's true in like a lot of aspects of our society. We don't need that profit incentive.
And I think, I'm just going to disclose I'm very biased because I'm a KPCC member, but I think NPR is like that because they're not profit driven. They're sustained by donations from people like myself and otherwise, and a small chunk from the government as well. But they're not incentivized by that. And so to me, their reporting holds some of the highest standards I view in terms of any story I ever get, like in the news, I always cross-check it through NPR or hear it first on NPR because they're not driven by the same things that CNN or whatever are. And those have their place too, though, but not in my.
I think to their credit, and maybe it goes a little too far. They try so hard to be unbiased and not.
You can feel it in their voice.
Dude,
I mean, they are.
They've had Nazis come out and talk, like white supremacists and stuff. Like they gave them a platform. So that's where I say, like, maybe you're going a little too far, but because it's like a public entity, because it's funded through public taxes. Yes, they get donations, but the second a public news agency starts putting out like let's say a liberal perspective, then the other side is just gonna be like, oh, our tax money is going towards leftist propaganda.
But I mean,
like that's literally that's that's their fear. That's their fear.
I listen to NPR as well, but sometimes I just bang my head against my car window because it really is just like. Repetitively, each story is very left. It is. It is well investigated.
It's left center. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it's very well investigated. That's what I appreciate of it. But I would not agree that it's
completely unbiased.
Yeah,
I don't think it's unbiased, but I hold its integrity very high. That's like a thing.
Integrity.
You know what I mean?
Integrity is an important thing because like,
we don't have it right now.
Well, some people, some sides don't have integrity. But
some people, let's just say some people don't have.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot of integrity in this room, though, I can safely say.
And in the other room, too.
And in the other room, too. I mean, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of integrity there.
Yeah, we're all a bunch of people that are very proud, and we don't want to look like assholes or.
Yes. One thing I've been thinking about throughout all of this, like when we're talking about the person who's controlling the medium, like even in this situation, like the fact that we're here recording this podcast with in Emin's studio, he's the only person that I personally know that like does this, who's from the community that I'm in. And so he has sort of built this platform for our whole community, like the group of people that we have sort of grown up with, and because he's made it open to us, and we've been able to access this resource as a result. And so it's interesting because now we, like, our family, like Armenian American families, like in LA, sort of have the ability to convey what we want to convey here.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. I think to start to send us off here, but because it's amazing that we have this. We're able now, not even just to our good friend, thanks to our good friend Emmy, but like technology and like
how
our society has kind of evolved, lets people have a almost open and free platform.
Right. It's no longer monolithic. It's now being like very, for better or worse, fragmentary and like kind of spread out.
Anyone can come in and say whatever crap they want, like me.
Well, not anyone. They need to knock on the door first.
I mean, like, it's not like we would have done this on the radio because we didn't have a connection in radio.
Exactly.
So,
right.
Yeah,
so
the internet.
It's interesting.
It's awesome. And I think with that, I think this was a good conversation. I think we're gonna wrap things up from at this point. I just want to say, Elena mentioned Emin. If you guys enjoyed this conversation and all that, tune in to some of the other podcasts that Emin's working on with some of our friends. We got the Level Up with John's on there too. They play video games and they basically talk about it, kind of shoot the shit. It's a lot of fun. I've been on there a couple times. They're good guys. And they also have the Weekly Tangent with Martin and all those guys. They talk about whatever goofy stuff's going on in the week, current events, media things, pop culture reference, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun. And I think we can conclude this conversation. This was a great conversation. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you,
really
Sean.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having us.
Got a lot of great minds, and I look forward to some more cool conversations. Hopefully, could get you guys back on for another conversation
anytime.
In the future.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys at home. Again, this has been Your Civic Duty. Please remember to like and subscribe.